Hello and welcome to our channel. What if I told you that long before the rise of Rome, before the castles of Europe, there were empires in Africa so powerful, so wealthy, and so advanced, they rewrote the rules of civilization. From cities of gold hidden in the Sahel to warrior queens who defied empires, and kings whose names echoed across continents. This is the untold story of Africa's greatest kingdoms. Why were these empires erased from mainstream history? And what secrets still lie buried beneath the sands of time? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about African history. The lost empires of Africa. History they don't want you to know. What if I told you Africa once held empires so vast, so powerful, and so rich? They rivaled Rome, Persia, and even China. Why are these stories missing from your history books? Who were these kings and queens, whose names shaped the world, but were buried by time and silence? The lost empires of Africa. History they don't want you to know. For centuries, the narrative of African history has been distorted, reduced to a single story of colonization and struggle. But long before that, there were empires, glorious, innovative, and powerful kingdoms that controlled trade, built cities of stone and gold, and led scientific and cultural revolutions. This isn't fiction. These are real places, real people, and real power. The Empire of Mali and Mansa Musa. Let's start with the Mali Empire, one of the richest empires in human history. At its height in the 14th century, Mali stretched across West Africa, dominating gold and salt trade routes. And then there was Mansa Musa, the emperor, who in 1324 went on a pilgrimage to Mecca with a caravan so massive, so dripping in gold, that he caused inflation across the Middle East. Historians say he might have been the wealthiest person ever. But Mali wasn't just about wealth, it was about knowledge. The city of Timbuktu became a center of learning, home to one of the largest libraries in the ancient world. The Great Walls of Benin now travel south to what is now Nigeria. Here stood the Kingdom of Benin, home to astonishing artistry and engineering feats. The Great Walls of Benin were said to be 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China, and the Benin Bronzes, masterpieces of metalwork that stunned even European explorers. So why were these treasures stolen and displayed in foreign museums? Why aren't they common knowledge? Great Zimbabwe, the Stone City. In southern Africa, Great Zimbabwe rose from the earth like a mystery carved in stone. Towering stone walls built without mortar, some over 30 feet tall, housing thousands of people. For years, European colonists denied Africans could have built something so advanced, but archaeological evidence says otherwise. This was a thriving city, built by Africans, ruled by powerful kings, and trading with Persia, India, and China. Forgotten queens and warriors? Let's not forget the fierce women who shaped history. Queen Amina of Zatsu led armies into battle, expanding her territory with strategy and skill. Kandak and Meninus of Kush defeated the Romans and forced them to negotiate a rare feat in Roman history. These weren't just queens, they were warriors, strategists, builders of nations. Why this history was buried so? Why have you never heard of any of this? During colonization, these stories were erased, rewritten, or simply ignored. A powerful Africa didn't fit the narrative, but now the truth is resurfacing, and the past is being reclaimed. African history is not a side note. It's the origin of empires, the root of science, trade, philosophy, and power. And it's time the world knew. Like, subscribe, share. If you want to hear more untold stories like this, subscribe, hit the bell, and join the journey as we uncover the lost pages of history. Africa was never a dark continent. It was a land of shining kingdoms, and their light is returning. Africa's hidden kingdoms, Mali, Songhai, Benin, and Kush. The real history they didn't teach you. Before the skyscrapers of New York, before the palaces of Versailles, Africa had empires. Grand, sophisticated, and powerful. The world has forgotten their names, but not for long. Mali, Songhai, Benin, Kush. This isn't just black history, it's world history. Let's rediscover the African empires they didn't want you to know. Africa's hidden kingdoms. The truth about Mali, Songhai, Benin, and Kush. For centuries, the story of Africa has been told through a narrow lens. Poverty, colonization, struggle. But long before that, Africa was the beating heart of innovation, wealth, and military power. In this video, we journey through 4 powerful empires that shaped the destiny of not just Africa, but the entire world. The Mali Empire, gold, knowledge, and Mansa Musa. Let's begin in West Africa, the land of gold. In the 13th century, the Mali Empire rose to dominate trade, politics, and culture in Africa. Its most legendary ruler, Mansa Musa, the emperor so rich that when he traveled to Mecca in 1324, he gave away so much gold that it collapsed economies for over a decade. But Mali wasn't just wealthy, it was wise. Timbuktu became a center of learning, with libraries, universities, and scholars from all over the Islamic world. It was a shining light of intellectualism. Timbuktu had more books than any city in Europe. The Songhai Empire, warriors, strategy, and urban power. As Mali declined, a new power emerged, the Songhai Empire. Bigger, stronger, ruthless in its rise. Under rulers like Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad, Songhai built one of the largest empires in African history. Its capital Gao was a metropolis of commerce and architecture. Sunni Ali was a tactical genius. He combined infantry, cavalry, and river fleets to dominate both land and water. No kingdom in the region could match their military coordination. Askia Muhammad took Songhai even further, reforming the legal system, promoting education, and linking the empire to the Islamic world. The Benin Kingdom artistry, walls, and royal power. Now travel south to the forested region of what is today southern Nigeria. There lies the Kingdom of Benin, a civilization famous for its stunning artistry and engineering. The Benin Bronzes, cast in brass and bronze, are considered some of the most sophisticated artworks in human history. They depict royal life, warriors, and historical events in exquisite detail. But it wasn't just art. Benin City was a marvel of urban planning, with massive earth walls stretching over 16,000 kilometers. Some historians called it the greatest earthwork in the world. So why are these treasures sitting in European museums? Why was Benin brutally invaded in 1897? That's the price of power. And the threat of beauty unrecognized. The Kingdom of Kush, Egypt's equal and rival. Before Mali and Benin, even before ancient Greece. There was Kush, centered in Nubia, modern-day Sudan. The Kingdom of Kush stood toe-to-toe with ancient Egypt. Kushite kings ruled Egypt as its 25th dynasty. Yes, Africans ruled over the pharaohs. They revived temples, preserved the culture, and brought stability to the Nile Valley. The Kandax warrior queens of Kush led armies into battle and commanded massive territories. One of them, Queen Amenarina's, defeated the Romans and signed a peace treaty on her terms. The pyramids of Kush still stand today, smaller than Egypt's, but more numerous, a legacy in stone waiting to be rediscovered. Why you never learned this in school? So, why wasn't this taught in school? Why have these empires been forgotten, downplayed, or erased? Because these stories challenge the myth that Africa contributed little to global civilization. They show Africa not as a continent in need, but as a cradle of strength, innovation, and legacy. Mali's wealth, Songhai's strategy, Benin's artistry, Kush's resilience. These aren't just stories of the past, they're blueprints for the future. Subscribe, like, share. If you believe history should be complete, not convenient, hit subscribe, because this is just the beginning. More kingdoms, more stories, more truth. Kingdoms and empires in African history. There were many kingdoms and empires in all regions of the continent of Africa throughout history. A kingdom is a state with a king or queen as its head. An empire is a political unit made up of several territories, military outposts, and peoples, usually created by conquest, and divided between a dominant center and subordinate peripheries. In Africa, states emerged in a process covering many generations and centuries. Most states were created through conquest or the borrowing and assimilation of ideas and institutions, while some developed through internal, largely isolated development. Economic development gave rise to a perceived need for centralized institutions and territorial leadership that transcended older bonds of kinship and community. The politico-religious struggle between the people and the king sometimes saw the people victorious and the establishment of sacred kings. With little political power termed adverse sacralization, contrasted with divine kings equated to gods. Kings and queens used both instrumental power, the employment of direct influence to achieve a desired outcome, and creative power, the use of ritual and mythology. Origin myths serve multiple purposes, helping to define a group's identity and forge sociocultural alliances, and provide the fulcrum on which a group's religious ideology rests. Dynastic oral traditions often have the king as a stranger, situated above or beyond society. They are considered a source of order, fertility, and well-being, but also volatile, capricious, and potentially dangerous. Despite this, popular understanding often claims that the continent lacked large states or meaningful, complex political organization. Whether rooted in ignorance, Eurocentrism, or racism, famous historians such as Hugh Trevor Roper have argued that African history is not characterized by state formation or hierarchical structures. In fact, the nature of political organization varied greatly across the continent, from the expansive West Sudanic empires to the sacral Congolese empires akin to confederations or commonwealths, and the immensely hierarchical kingdoms of the Great Lakes. The vast majority of states included in this list existed prior to the scramble for Africa c. 1880 to 1914, when, driven by the Second Industrial Revolution, European powers rapidly invaded, conquered, and colonized Africa. While most states were conquered and dissolved, some kings and elites negotiated the terms of colonial rule, and traditional power structures were incorporated into the colonial regimes as a form of indirect rule. In the mid-late 20th century, decolonization saw Africans inherit the former colonies, and many traditional kingdoms still exist today as non-sovereign monarchies. The roles, powers, and influence of traditional monarchs throughout Africa varies greatly depending on the state. In some states, such as Angola, the local monarch may play an integral role in the local governing council of a region. On the flip side, their powers may be curtailed, as happened in 2022 with Wade in Chad, or their positions abolished, as happened in Tanzania in 1962 and in 1966 in Uganda with Baganda, which was later restored in 1993. In this list, they are labeled NS. The decolonization of Africa was a series of political developments in Africa that spanned from the mid-1950s to 1975. During the Cold War, colonial governments gave way to sovereign states in a process often marred by violence, political turmoil, widespread unrest, and organized revolts. Major events in the decolonization of Africa included the Momo Rebellion, the Algerian War, the Congo Crisis, the Angolan War of Independence, the Zanzibar Revolution, and the events leading to the Nigerian Civil War. The scramble for Africa between 1870 and 1914 was a significant period of European imperialism in Africa that ended with almost all of Africa and its natural resources claimed as colonies by European powers, who raced to secure as much land as possible while avoiding conflict amongst themselves. The partition of Africa was confirmed at the Berlin Conference of 1885. Without regard for the existing political and social structures, almost all the pre-colonial states of Africa lost their sovereignty. The only exceptions were Liberia, which had been settled in the early 19th century by formerly enslaved African Americans and was recognized as independent by the United States in 1862, but was viewed by European powers as being in the United States' sphere of influence. And Ethiopia, which won its independence at the Battle of Adwa Bud, was later occupied by Italy in 1936. Britain and France had the largest holdings, but Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Portugal also had colonies. By 1977, 50 African countries had gained independence from European colonial powers. There are only 3 current sovereign monarchies in Africa, 2 of which, Lesotho and Morocco, are constitutional monarchies, where the rulers are bound by laws and customs in the exercise of their powers, while one, Eswatini, is an absolute monarchy, where the monarch rules without bounds. Sovereign monarchies are labeled. Monarchy was the prevalent form of government in the history of Africa, where self-governing states, territories, or nations existed, in which supreme power resided with an individual who was recognized as the head of state. Many such states exist today. All are similar in that the sovereign inherits their office and typically keeps it until their death or until their abdication. However, only 3 are currently sovereign, while the remaining are subnational monarchies. 2 of the former are constitutional monarchies, Lesotho and Morocco, in which the sovereign is bound by laws and customs in the exercise of his or her powers. And one is an absolute monarchy, Eswatini, in which the sovereign rules without bounds. The subnational monarchies are not sovereign and exist within larger political associations, such as the Ashanti of Ghana, Bini of Nigeria, and the Xhosa and Zulu of South Africa. In addition to these, there are also three dependencies of two European monarchies: St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha of the United Kingdom and the Canary Islands, and Ceuta and Melilla of Spain. Due to trans-Saharan trade, the early settlements of West Africa and the largely nomadic communities in North Africa had the capacity to support formal establishments and form states. Increased trade along the Nile Valley facilitated similar developments in East Africa. In response to this, authoritative leaderships developed to facilitate stable growth and interactions. An example is the emergence of the Sao civilization as early as the 6th century BCE between the Bilma Oasis and Lake Chad. Other monarchies were established with foreign intervention. One such intervention was by Rome in North Africa. The Kingdom of Numidia, in what is present-day Algeria, came to be established around 200 BC with Mansa as the first king. He was one of the many kings who headed large indigenous communities in the North African coastal belt that engaged the trans-Saharan trade route for subsistence. With the tacit strategic support of Rome, Mansa took control of all the nomadic communities and was crowned king. Numidia was the ancient kingdom of the Numidians in northwest Africa, initially comprising the territory that now makes up Algeria, but later expanding across what is today known as Tunisia and Libya. The polity was originally divided between the Massili state in the east capital, Kirta, and the Massasili state in the west capital. Saigad during the Second Punic War to 18 to 201 BC, Mansa, king of the Massili, defeated Sifox of the Massasili to unify Numidia into the first unified Berber state for Numidians in present-day Algeria. The kingdom began as a sovereign state and an ally of Rome, and later alternated between being a Roman province and a Roman client state. Numidia, at its foundation, was bordered by the Maluya River to the west, Africa Proconsularis and Cyrenaica to the east, the Mediterranean Sea to the north, and the Sahara to the south, so that Numidia entirely surrounded Carthage except towards the sea. Before Mansa expanded past the Maluya and vassalizing Baka and reached the Atlantic Ocean to the west, the Greek historians referred to these peoples as Nu Omicron Mu, Y Delta Epsilon Sigma, i.e. nomads, which by Latin interpretation became Numidae historian Gabriel Camps. However, disputes this claim, favoring instead a local African origin for the term. Despite their presence, the Numidians are scarcely mentioned in Greek and Roman historical accounts until the First Punic War to 64 to 241 BC, when the Greek historian Polybius first noted their cavalry. He also indicated the peoples and territory west of Carthage, including the entire north of Algeria as far as the river Maluya. The Numidians were a nomadic tribal people who inhabited North Africa, specifically the regions that now form northern Algeria and western Tunisia. During the final 3 centuries of the first millennium BC, their lands bordered the Carthaginian hinterlands in eastern Tunisia to the east, the territory of the Maori tribes to the west, and the Saharan edge occupied by the Gaetulians to the south. By the time of the Second Punic War in 218 BC, the previously scattered Numidian tribes had consolidated into 2 great and rival tribal groups, the Massilian, eastern Numidia, and the Massasili in the west. During the first part of the Second Punic War, the eastern Massili, under their king Galla, were allied with Carthage, while the western Massasili, under King Sifox, were allied with Rome. The kingdom of Massasili, under Sifox, extended from the Maluya River to Wed Rumuel. The Romans worked hard to cultivate Sifox's friendship and helped to train his troops in the techniques of infantry warfare. Sifox initially defeated Galla, but Galla's son Mansa, raised in Carthage, rallied forces and defeated Sifox twice by 212 BC, forcing him to flee. Mansa then joined the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal Barca in Spain, where he played a key role in Carthaginian victories against Rome. After Galla's death, Carthage stripped Mansa's family of their lands, prompting him to ally with Rome. Returning to Africa, he initially partnered with Sifox against Carthage. However, Hasdrubal married his daughter Sophonisba to Sifox, securing his loyalty to Carthage. Sifox defeated Mansa twice in 205 BC, forcing him to retreat into the mountains, where he waged a guerrilla campaign. eluding capture, and eventually joining forces with Scipio's Roman army. In 204 BC, the Roman general Scipio Africanus landed in Africa with Roman forces, joined by Mansa Musa, whose tactical brilliance became evident when he helped destroy a combined Carthaginian-Numidian camp and later defeated Sifax and Hasdrubal at the Battle of Cirta. In 203 BC, Mansa Musa captured Sifax and married Sophonisba, but Scipio, wary of her Carthaginian loyalty, demanded her surrender. To avoid enslavement, Sophonisba took poison, dying in 203 BC. There have been a number of autocratic presidents in Africa who have been characterized as disguised monarchs due to the absence of term limits, as well as those who have invoked hereditary succession in order to preserve their regimes, such as the Bongos of Gabon, of Togo, or Aptidangele of Djibouti, attracting the terms monarchical republic and presidential monarchism. These haven't been included. A crowned republic, also known as a monarchical republic, is a system of monarchy where the monarch's role is almost entirely ceremonial and where nearly all of the royal prerogatives are exercised in such a way that the monarch personally has little power over executive and constitutional issues. The term crowned republic has been used by a small number of authors below to informally describe governments such as Australia and the United Kingdom. Although these countries are usually classed as constitutional monarchies, the term may also refer to historical republics that had a doge as their head of state, most particularly Venice and Genoa, and is sometimes used to describe the current Republic of San Marino. The terms monarchical republic and presidential monarchism have also been used to refer to some contemporary presidential republics that have undergone a partial remonarchization, or to presidents who act as disguised monarchs, especially in Africa. There have been a number of autocratic presidents in Africa who have been characterized as disguised monarchs due to the absence of term limits, as well as those who have invoked hereditary succession in order to preserve their regimes, such as the Bongos of Gabon, of Togo, or Aptidangele of Djibouti, attracting the terms monarchical republic and presidential monarchism. These haven't been included. Only polities that were once independent and described as kingdoms or empires by reliable sources are included. The intercontinental Islamic empires that covered parts of North and Northeast Africa are not included and should be discussed as part of the Muslim world. However, the residual fragments that had their capital on the continent of Africa are. A polity is a group of people with a collective identity, who are organized by some form of political institutionalized social relations, and have a capacity to mobilize resources. A polity can be any group of people organized for governance, such as the board of a corporation, the government of a country, or the government of a country's subdivision. A polity may have various forms, such as a republic administered by an elected representative, the realm of a hereditary monarch, and others. The preeminent polities today are Westphalian states and nation-states, commonly referred to as countries. The terms Islamic world and Muslim world commonly refer to the Islamic community, which is also known as the Ummah. This consists of all those who adhere to the religious beliefs, politics, and laws of Islam, or to societies in which Islam is practiced. In a modern geopolitical sense, these terms refer to countries in which Islam is widespread, although there are no agreed criteria for inclusion. The term Muslim-majority countries is an alternative often used for the latter sense. The history of the Muslim world spans about 1,400 years and includes a variety of socio-political developments, as well as advances in the arts, science, medicine, philosophy, law, economics, and technology during the Islamic Golden Age. Muslims look for guidance to the Quran and believe in the prophetic mission of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, but disagreements on other matters have led to the appearance of different religious schools of thought and sects within Islam. The Islamic conquests, which culminated in the caliphate being established across 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe, enriched the Muslim world, achieving the economic preconditions for the emergence of this institution owing to the emphasis attached to Islamic teachings. In the modern era, most of the Muslim world came under European colonial domination. The nation-states that emerged in the post-colonial era have adopted a variety of political and economic models, and they have been affected by secular as well as religious trends. Oral traditions rarely incorporate chronological devices, and dates in this list are often estimates based off of lists of rulers. Dates have one date for loss of independence, one date for loss of nominal rule. Additional information, such as notable articles, may accompany entries. Comparison between kingdoms. Historian Jan van Sina, 1962, discusses the classification of sub-Saharan African kingdoms, mostly of Central, South, and East Africa. With some additional data on West African Sahelian kingdoms distinguishing 5 types by decreasing centralization of power. Sub-Saharan Africa is the area and regions of the continent of Africa that lie south of the Sahara. These include Central Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, and West Africa. Geopolitically, in addition to the African countries and territories that are situated fully in that specified region, the term may also include polities that only have part of their territory located in that region. Per the definition of the United Nations UN, this is considered a non-standardized geographical region with a number of countries included, varying from 46 to 48, depending on the organization describing the region. For example, UN, WHO, World Bank, etc. The African Union (O) uses a different regional breakdown, recognizing all 55 member states on the continent, grouping them into 5 distinct and standard regions. The term serves as a grouping counterpart to North Africa, which is instead grouped with the definition of MENA, i.e. Middle East, and North Africa, as it is part of the Arab world. And most North African states are likewise members of the Arab League. However, while they are also member states of the Arab League, the Comoros, Djibouti, Mauritania, and Somalia, and sometimes Sudan, are all geographically considered to be part of sub-Saharan Africa. Overall, the UN Development Programme applies the sub-Saharan classification to 46 of Africa's 55 countries, excluding Djibouti, Soder, Somalia, and Sudan. The concept has been criticized by scholars on both sides of the Sahara as a racialist construction. Since around 3900 BCE, the Saharan and sub-Saharan regions of Africa have been separated by the extremely harsh climate of the sparsely populated Sahara, forming an effective barrier that is interrupted only by the Nile in Sudan, though navigation on the Nile was blocked by the Sud and the river's cataracts. The Sahara pump theory explains how flora and fauna, including Homo sapiens, left Africa to penetrate Eurasia and beyond. African pluvial periods are associated with a wet Sahara phase, during which larger lakes and more rivers existed. Despotic kingdoms, kingdoms where the king controlled the internal and external affairs directly and personally appointed overseers. The king kept a monopoly on the use of force. Examples include Rwanda, Angkor, Ankle, and Congo of the 16th century. Regal kingdoms, kingdoms where the king controlled the external affairs directly, and the internal affairs via a system of overseers where most local chiefs kept their positions but not their autonomy after conquest. The king and most of his administration belonged to the same religion, group, and/or family. Incorporative kingdoms, kingdoms where the king only controlled the external affairs and the nucleus with no permanent administrative links between him and the chiefs of the provinces, the local chiefs of the provinces were left largely undisturbed after conquest. Examples are the Bamilek, Luba, and the Lozi. Aristocratic kingdoms, the only link between central authority and the provinces was payment of tribute, which symbolized subordination. These kingdoms were kept together by the superior military strength of the nucleus. This type is rather common in Africa. Examples include Congo of the 17th century, Kazembe, Cuba, the Ha and Chaga states of the 18th century. Federations kingdoms, where the external affairs were regulated by a council of elders headed by the king, who is simply primus inter pares, such as in the Ashanti Union. Confederations are not included. Classifications not given as examples by Van Sina are open to scrutiny. Ones where 2 classifications are given and joined by an and mean that the kingdom had elements from both present refers to the king's place and power, particularly in the nucleus, whilst refers to the relationship between king and administration. The kingdoms of Mali, Songhai, Benin, and Kush weren't footnotes in history. They were history. Their legacy wasn't lost, it was buried. And now we're digging it back up. One empire at a time. So if you thought this was incredible, just wait. There are still hidden dynasties, warrior queens, and golden cities we haven't even touched. Subscribe, hit the bell, and step into the real story of Africa. The story they never told you. So if you thought this was incredible, just wait. There are still hidden dynasties, warrior queens, and golden cities we haven't even touched. Subscribe, hit the bell, and step into the real story of Africa. The story they never told you. Africa wasn't waiting to be discovered. It was ruling the world. These were not tribes lost in time. They were empires that lit the way. Their stories weren't destroyed, they were buried. And it's time we uncover every last one. So if this history moved you, imagine what's still hidden. The kingdom of Great Zimbabwe, the empire of Aksum, the Moors of North Africa, the warrior queens of Dahomey. This is just the beginning. The real Wakanda, African cities lost to time, gives Mansa Musa the untold story of the world's richest man, gives Africa's warrior queens who fought empires. Don't stop here. The map is vast. The kingdoms are calling. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Click, explore, and reclaim the story.